Welcome everyone to By Jash Channel. All right, so today we're going deep with Wilbur Smith and his book Call of the Raven. It's more than just adventure though. This book really takes you back to the 1840s in both England and America and throws you right into this world of slavery, betrayals, and revenge. I'm so glad to have an expert with us today who really knows their stuff when it comes to historical fiction. I think they'll be able to help us break down this epic story.
I'm happy to be here. Call of the Raven is a great example of how historical fiction can take us to another time and place and make us think about tough questions. Questions about, morality, human nature, all that.
Exactly. And right at the center of it all, we've got Mungo St John. He starts out as this young guy from Virginia who seems okay with slavery because, well, it's making him rich. But then we find out about this bet he makes. He actually bets that he can stop the slave trade from being abolished. What did you think about that?
Well, that wager really shows us how practical Mungo is at the beginning, even ruthless, you could say, when it comes to his own interests. What's interesting is that Smith is already hinting at this conflict inside Mungo right from the start. We can especially see it in how he interacts with Fairchild, the abolitionist.
Oh, their dynamic is so interesting. It's like a constant back and forth between making money and doing what's right. And then, of course, everything changes dramatically, and Mungo has to escape to America. He leaves behind his family's plantation and a forbidden love. Talk about a turning point.
Yeah, it's almost like he's being pushed onto a completely different path, one where he can't ignore the realities of slavery anymore. And that leads us to that really intense journey on the Blackhawks. That was a slave ship where he sees the brutality of the system he used to profit from.
The book definitely doesn't hold back on showing us the horrors of that journey. It makes you wonder how Mungo can deal with what he's seeing, given his own past. But even in all that darkness, there's this unexpected bit of humanity in his relationship with Tipu.
Yeah, Tipu, who starts as a fellow sailor and becomes a close friend, really challenges Mungo's ideas about race and slavery. Their connection, which forms within this horrible system, says a lot about how human connection can go beyond even the things that divide us most. And it's through this relationship that we see Mungo's internal struggle start to change him.
You can really sense his morals shifting as he sees how terribly the enslaved people are being treated.
Yeah.
And then there's that moment where he steps in to save a young girl from Lanahan's abuse.
Oh, yeah. That act of defiance is like a spark that sets off a rebellion. It leads to a slave revolt, and eventually Mungo's escape. It's a thrilling part of the book, and it shows a big change in Mungo. He goes from just being involved to actively fighting back.
From there, wanting revenge against Chester Marion, the guy who betrayed him, Mungo starts a new chapter. He builds a life in Africa, gets his own ship called the Raven, and gets involved in the ivory trade.
It's important to think about the context of the ivory trade back then in the 19th century. It did bring Mungo wealth and power, but it was also closely tied to colonialism and exploiting Africa's resources and people. This adds another layer to how complex Mungo's morals are. He's trying to get away from one bad system, but he ends up participating in another one.
It's that constant tension between wanting revenge and developing a sense of morality that keeps you hooked.
Yeah.
You keep asking yourself, will he give in to his darker side, or will he find a new way for himself?
And just when you think Mungo might be figuring things out, Smith throws in another twist. Camilla, Mungo's old love, comes back into the picture. But tragically, she's now enslaved by Chester himself.
Oh man, what a blow. And the way she uses dogwood flowers to secretly communicate with Mungo is both sad and clever. What did you think about her character in these awful circumstances?
Yeah. Camilla's strength in the face of such hardship is amazing. Despite everything she's going through, she keeps her spirit. She even uses her position to subtly work against Chester. Remember how she cleverly gets him to sell Windemere for less than it's worth? She's not just a victim. She's a survivor actively fighting back against her oppressor.
It makes their reunion that much more powerful. And that sets us up for the big showdown at Bannerfield.
The confrontation between Mungo and Chester is like the climax of all the tension, betrayals, and moral struggles that have built up throughout the book.
Mungo is carefully planning his attack. Camilla is desperately trying to survive. And Chester, who represents cruelty and greed, is standing in their way. This is where things get really good.
And with that, we're thrown to a whirlwind of actions, secrets, and moral choices. That attack on Bannerfield, it's not just a fight. It's like a clash of ideas, a reckoning with the past.
Yeah, you could really feel the weight of everything that's happened leading up to this moment as these characters fight for their lives and what they believe in.
And Smith is a master at building tension and suspense.
But you know what really got me? It was the dilemma Mungo faces when he finally gets Chester cornered. He's been so focused on getting revenge, and yet when he has the chance, he hesitates.
Yeah, that hesitation tells us a lot about how Mungo has changed. He's not that same vengeful guy he was at the beginning of the story. Everything he's been through, especially his relationship with Tipu and his love for Camilla, have forced him to really think about what's right and wrong.
And then there's that surprise.
Yeah.
Isaac Camilla's son ends up playing a big part in Mungo's decision.
Right, Isaac adds a whole other layer to this confrontation. He represents innocence caught in the middle of all this, a reminder of the human cost of revenge. The fact that Mungo chooses to spare Chester because of this young boy suggests he's moving away from just wanting to punish Chester. It's like he's starting to understand justice in a more complex way.
It's a powerful moment that really highlights the main theme of the book, the idea that violence just keeps going and that the effects of slavery last a long time. Even as Mungo tries to destroy Chester's world, he's wrestling with the question of whether revenge can ever truly bring justice.
And that brings us to the ending, which I think is one of the things that makes you think the most in this novel. Mungo does achieve his goals. He exposes Chester's crimes, frees the people enslaved at Bannerfield, and brings down a symbol of oppression. But the question is, was it worth it?
Yeah, he's lost Camilla, his ship is destroyed, and he's left carrying the emotional and moral burden of what he's done. So is this really a victory, or is it a win that leaves him empty?
That's the thing about Call of the Raven. It doesn't give you easy answers or simple endings. Instead, it makes us think about the complicated realities of historical injustices and how hard it is to find both personal and societal redemption.
I like how Smith weaves actual historical details into the story. We see how ships were navigated back then, the awful conditions on slave ships, and even the social scene in New Orleans.
Smith's attention to detail makes the story feel real. It immerses you in what it was like to be alive in the 19th century, the sights, the sounds, even the smells. He doesn't shy away from showing how brutal the slave trade was, but he also shows how people resisted and persevered. It reminds us that even in oppressive systems, people can still find ways to have agency and show compassion.
We definitely see that resilience in Camilla, who never loses her spirit or her cleverness, even though she's enslaved. The way she manipulates Chester, her love for her son, and how she secretly communicates with Mungo using dogwood flowers all show her strength and determination.
Her character is a great example of how strong the human spirit can be, even when facing unbelievable hardship. And her story, together with Mungo's, makes us think about the lasting impact of slavery, not just on individuals, but on families and future generations.
And we can't forget Tipu, whose friendship with Mungo challenges the racist ideas of their time. Their connection shows that people can form real bonds even when there are huge differences between them. It's like a ray of hope amidst the darkness of the slave trade.
Tipu being there really emphasizes the novel's exploration of human connection and empathy. He acts as a kind of moral guide for Mungo, challenging his prejudices and helping him see beyond his limited perspective.
It's amazing how all these individual stories come together to create a powerful picture of this turbulent time in history. We see the complexities of the fight to abolish slavery, the economic forces behind the slave trade, and the personal journeys of people caught in the middle of it all.
Call of the Raven is more than just an adventure story. It's a deep look into morality, revenge, and the lasting effects of history. It forces us to ask difficult questions about our involvement, responsibility, and the legacies of injustice that we still deal with.
And it definitely leaves you feeling a bit unsettled. It makes you think about how these themes are still relevant in our world today.
That's right. It reminds us that the fight for justice and equality is something that never ends. It's something that needs constant attention and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths about both our past and our present. One thing that I find fascinating is how Smith doesn't shy away from those gray areas of morality. Like Mungo, even though he's fighting against slavery, isn't some perfect hero. He makes mistakes, acts without thinking, and struggles with his own violent tendencies.
Yeah, he's kind of a mix of wanting revenge, but also becoming more against slavery. He's a businessman and an adventurer all at the same time. And that complexity is reflected in other characters too, like Solange, the Marquise de Noailles. She's got this fiery personality, a history with Mungo, and she definitely knows how to get her way. What were your thoughts on her role in the story?
Solange is a force to be reckoned with. She's cunning and ambitious. She's part of New Orleans society, but she isn't afraid to challenge the rules or use situations to her advantage. And her decision to help Mungo financially in his fight against Chester adds another layer to their already complicated relationship.
I was always trying to figure out what her motives were. Is she driven by genuine feelings for Mungo, or does she want revenge against her brother? Or maybe it's just her own ambition.
That's what's so great about Solange's character. You can't easily put her in a box. She's a woman who plays the game her own way, and her presence shakes up the power dynamics in the story.
And then there's that huge revelation near the end. Isaac Camilla's son is actually Chester's child. That changes everything about the relationships and power struggles.
It's a twist that shows how deeply the effects of slavery can reach, even into the most personal parts of people's lives. It emphasizes how connected these characters are and how the past continues to affect the present.
It makes you realize that even though slavery was officially abolished, its consequences continue to ripple through generations. The sins of the father, as they say, are passed down to the son, even if the son had nothing to do with it.
Exactly. And that connects back to one of the most powerful messages in the book. Real justice isn't just about dismantling systems of oppression. It also requires dealing with the emotional and psychological wounds left behind the trauma that continues to affect people who were impacted by this terrible period in history.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Call of the Raven, what are some of the main things you hope listeners will take away from this story?
I think Smith does an incredible job of using this exciting, action-packed story to explore profound questions about morality, revenge, and the legacy of injustice. He shows us that the difference between good and evil isn't always clear, and even people fighting for what's right can be tempted by their own darker impulses.
It reminds us that fighting for justice is complicated. It takes more than just bravery and strong beliefs. It also takes empathy, compassion, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our past.
And maybe most importantly, Call of the Raven reminds us that history isn't just a bunch of dates and events. It's made up of the lives, choices, and struggles of real people. By putting ourselves in the shoes of characters like Mungo Camilla and Tipu, we can better understand how much oppression costs human beings and how powerful resilience can be.
It's a story that stays with you long after you've finished reading it. It makes you think about the complexities of our world and the decisions we make when faced with injustice. If you haven't read Call of the Raven yet, I highly recommend checking it out. And if this deep dive has made you curious about Wilbur Smith or the history of the slave trade, I encourage you to explore those topics further. There's so much out there to learn and discover.
Absolutely. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep those minds engaged.